Welcome. We're Poonam and Julianne of Level Up Leaders, and this is where we discuss trauma-informed leadership.
We take real questions from group practice owners like you who are really committed to creating psychologically safe work cultures.
And we'll show you how to approach leadership from a relational lens that supports a culture of trust. So let's get into today's question.
Yeah, so our first question is how do we help hold our teams accountable for co-creating a positive work culture? I think sometimes they just assume that it's up to owners and leaders to do on our own.
Mm, Such a good question.
Hmm.
I think before we can get into talking about how do we hold our folks accountable to co-creating our work culture, we have to examine and explore our work culture norms. So something that we find is common practice is that group practices will have outward or community facing values, and these are the values that share your therapeutic approach with your clients and with your community. Um, and what's missing is our inner facing values, if you will, or work culture norms. And what's different about our work culture norms than our outward facing values is our work culture norms tell us how we are going to relate to each other, how we support each other, how we show up for each other, how we address ruptures and disagreements with each other. So your website might list a value like we're compassionate practice or we're trauma informed to communicate that therapeutic approach to clients. And what we're needing to ask ourselves is what does this look like when we're talking about our interfacing values? And what does this look like with our people and how we relate to each other? So, something we want to ask ourselves is what, in addition to what are our work culture norms, how do we define these work culture norms? What do they look like in day to day practice?
Right. If we say to our team, let's meet on the field and let's play a game of football. And let's say half of your folks hear soccer. They're thinking we're gonna go play some soccer, and then other half of your folks are like, oh, we're gonna play American football. So everyone shows up on the field. Everyone's like in different gear. We have di two different like sports balls that people are confused and wanting to like play around. And it just shows where confusion can come when there's not like clear rules of engagement or clear rules of like, here's how we connect, and here's how we have shared language, and here's how we define what we do, and what does it mean if you do this specific, play or show up in this specific way, and how do we like actually translate that into how we show up in space together so it can be essentially reinforced and named and everyone just has clarity and actually then even more, I think, permission and autonomy to know how to show up because those things are talked about and defined.
Exactly. So let's say I have a norm around collaboration, and you might define that differently than me. For me, I might want to be explicit in sharing with my team. For us, being in collaboration with each other means that we're holding awareness that everyone's contributions matter and that we are expected to reach out to each other for support, that we are going to ask questions of one another when we get stuck, and that we are working together to achieve a common goal.
Hmm. Yeah, and if we want to do something that's about maybe a norm when it comes to how folks show up in their work, if I think about like compassionate accountability, if that was to be defined, we might define that as saying like, compassionate accountability means that we pause first to reflect on have we done our part, and if not, how do we compassionately name that to ourselves or to those we work with? And if we have done our part, how do we compassionately name to those we work with what we're needing from them? And so that can be an example of a way to name it, define it, and have it be something people can actually speak to.
Exactly. And then once we've defined it, we want to talk about how are we starting to reinforce these things. And so one way to do that could be to use a metaphor or a story or an analogy to bring that work culture norm to life. In my case, let's say we're talking about collaboration, and more recently, I've been inspired by football. I now have a ninth grader, and so I'm going to high school football games. And what really strikes me when I go is watching the players when they're on offense working towards a common goal to move the ball forward. And so, what I might say to my team during a team meeting is, hey, I really want to talk about our value of collaboration. And I really want to talk about what I've been seeing on a football field recently and the way in which all of these players have a role and the way that they're working towards a common vision. And what's really important for us in our culture is how we work together to keep the ball moving forward. And now we've got a story. It's brought this culture norm to life. And now, when I notice that we maybe aren't anchoring into that value, I might be able to say, I wonder if in this moment we're not moving that ball forward.
Hmm.
And what that does is it allows everybody to know that we're noticing that there's maybe a misstep. And now this gives us an opportunity to reset, to work towards moving that ball forward. So there's a low pressure sort of a saying
Hmm.
that keeps us aligned and keeps us on the same page.
Yeah, it feels a way more accessible to talk about. And we can lean on like that shared language that reflects something that's a little more lighthearted, right? Like having this whatever analogy or and you can be really creative here and like kind of dig deep and like even make this into an activity with your team, right? And so it could even be something you all create and put on your wall, or like there's so many ways you can reinforce this. But it does, I feel like, make it more accessible and less awkward when folks aren't ready to directly name it. I think when there's a lot more trust, this is where you can get to maybe even more explicitly and directly naming it. This is a little more practical, but it's naming anytime it's not in the room versus when it is. And so when you see someone, I'm going to go back to the compassionate accountability. If I'm in team meeting and I actually see someone kind of owning part of their work, I'm going to maybe pause everyone and be like, thank you. Like, I really appreciate that you just took ownership. That really is reflecting compassionate accountability. So I just wanted to name that. Maybe you're modeling for your team and you notice a moment where you dropped the ball, uh, no pun intended. And you're actually saying, like, I want to name that I see where I didn't take accountability or I didn't do this piece, and I want to compassionately name that and commit to moving this forward. And so I think when you're able to talk about when we're in alignment versus when we're not, it helps bring language again in a very practical way. And so then you can even say, you know what, let's restart this conversation. If we were to actually look at this through the lens of compassionate accountability, would we see anything differently here? What are you all seeing? What do you notice? And it's just like a way to like engage them in process, in a way that again feels a little more accessible versus just saying like, in what ways are you not meeting expectations? That's it's just not the conversation is just not going to flow in the same way versus them understanding here are the norms. Here's the way we reinforce expectations. Here's the way we enforce how we show up together.
And other ways to continue to be direct about that is adding these norms to perhaps a supervision note or a performance review, and on
Mm.
an ongoing, regular basis, talking about how we're doing with those norms. So, how are we doing with collaboration this week? Were there opportunities for you to practice that? And what did that look like for you? How are we doing with compassionate accountability? How did that show up for you in your interactions with your colleagues? And now we're looking for opportunities to practice these norms on a day-to-day basis, and it becomes a breathing part of your ecosystem.
So yeah, we'd love to hear from you all. Where do you feel like co-creating work culture feels really accessible, and where do you feel like it can feel like a stuck point? And if you resonated with anything, we'd love for you to like or share, and we hope to see you next time.
Thanks for watching.